Hello, everybody. This is a Popular Podcast. It's June 15th. I don't know. July 15th. Oh my god. It's kind of early for me. I'm having my morning coffee. Listen. So let's get together and let's talk about what's happening on unpopularfront.com. This week, I published 3 articles. You can go read them at unpopularfront.com. And it seemed like for 2 of them especially, there's a bit of a theme for this week, which is the liberal panic about scaring off the right, or maybe making it to where, liberals are so concerned that the left and, even other liberals are like, we're not playing the game right. We're not being civil in the right way. And that, we're getting too cocky. We're being a little bit too critical, or a little bit too crass. And I guess I wanted to talk about that. So probably the article that I most recently wrote was concerning this new Sacha Baron Cohen show. Sacha Baron Cohen, creator of The Ali G Show, which is also the home of where probably his most popular character, probably his biggest breakout, was the movie Borat. My wife, I have to say that. That's the last time I'm going to say it, though, because it's super old. Borat was particularly a cultural phenomena when it came out. There had not really been something as big and as popular that kind of melded the sort of sketch comedy with reality, in a way that really just committed to the bit. Like, it was sort of at a different degree than your sort of, like, Daily Show correspondent segment, where the character and the punchline of the joke really was the character of Borat. He would put Borat in these awkward situations, but I always found that to be really interesting and sort of a fun way to sort of poke fun at America through a ridiculous character who himself was the punchline, but sort of through the reactions you could sort of get a greater truth beyond just like the ridiculous jokes and the obviously overdone anti-Semitism, etc. But this week in Vox, Asia Romano wrote a piece that contended that for Baron Cohen's new show, which is coming out, that by him tricking conservative politicians and media figures, there's not really much of a difference anyways, he is just putting, he's putting fuel to the fire of the fake news scare, and it's not worth the cost to get these giggles and to get sort of the catharsis that we will get from this kind of comedy. She, in a very sort of Vox.com style liberal way. I almost feel bad, like, dunking on Vox, because this is, like, particularly bad. This is, like, Vox has plenty of writers. Even people who I have dunked on in the past, who I have had major problems with, like 2 of the founders, Matt Iglesias and Ezra Klein, who are just eminently punchable for their just sort of, like, DC wonkness. Even they don't have takes this bad on this stuff. So, like, really, it's particularly a sort of brand of civility and respectability politics that Romano is engaging in. And I I seriously wonder how people can have these perspectives at a certain point. Like, I know that they're basically playing within conventional wisdom and within the mainstream idea, which is all basically rooted. I don't even know if Romano would even know this, but sort of their perspective is of this sort of median voter model that dominated political science and political campaigns for generations, which is this idea that there is the center voter, and your idea as a political movement and a political campaign is to focus your messaging and your policies and how you operate on attracting that median voter. And that there are these extremes on the sides, but the median voter is who you're going for. And also that all the sides are basically operating under the same framework. We're just sort of arguing over the size of government, for example, or, like a few distinct policy disagreements, not on, on how we deal with the problem, not on a complete separate worldview of what the problems we're even trying to solve is. And Romano's point that shows like the new Sacha Baron Cohen show are going to sort of inflame the fake news controversy, or this idea that conservative media and conservative voters, and what I'm trying to start calling them reactionaries, that reactionaries are not going to believe, quote, as Romano calls it, liberal media because of things like Sacha Baron Cohen's show. Just belies the fact that, like, that dam broke so long ago. And the funny thing is, in Romano's article, she basically says that, but she still holds that this kind of stuff is not worth it. She says that, that media consumptions have changed, and that there are different sort of forms of media that have come about that have really changed the purpose of satire and certain models. But the problem with that is, in the political context that Romano is arguing from, the conservative voter and the reactionary voter doesn't operate in the same worldview. Just look at the different sort of conspiracy theories that are incredibly mainstream among reactionary voters over the past 10 years. Look at something like birtherism. There was so much evidence built on this that was like conclusive proof. Obama was born in Hawaii. There was all this stuff. It did not matter. Even talk about something more recently. Talk about how reactionaries and Trumpists are so prone to believe that the children brought to the border, who they are all in support of putting in little kiddie jails, that this belief that those children are brought, not that they're going there to escape death from Central American gangs, which America has helped create a vacuum to empower, but rather that they're doing that as part of an MS-13 plan to do human trafficking and smuggle drugs and guns and whatever, Like, these are mainstream beliefs that there's plenty of evidence to dissuade them on, yet they still believe them. So then, to have someone like Romano say that we need to be cautious about satire because of how that might affect some random MAGA chud is incredibly disingenuous and just stupid. It's lacking the understanding of who you're actually dealing with. And and another part of this piece in Vox that I was commenting on was the fact that it also didn't recognize the context of the joke that was played on particularly Judge Roy Moore. Judge Roy Moore, everyone's favorite pedophile judge, I guess. I don't know. I mean, he is the MAGA chud's favorite pedophile judge. I don't really know how else to describe it. He was tricked by Baron Cohen to go to a fake pro-Israel event where at the end of it, they decided to sing a fake Israeli anthem. I believe the anthem was the song from Borat, Throw the Jew Down the Well, which is funny, because it's ridiculous. And it highlights how, the dynamics of that issue are that Zionism in America, with my generation, with millennials, is losing a bit of steam. I think for multiple generations, for boomers and for Gen X Jews, Israel was just sort of like a thing that they just naturally, without question, supported. There are many reasons why. I think there was a lot of work done post World War II among Jews to really identify Israel as kind of an idea of safety after the trauma of World War II. And there was also plenty of money and interest by the Israeli government to sort of connect American Jewry to Israel. But over the generations, and after the atrocities and policies done by the Israeli government that have effectively created an apartheid system, a lot of Jews, especially those who are liberal and, to the left of that, like me, we just can't stomach it anymore. We don't want any part of that. And that's pushed a lot of Jews, like me, to become, anti-Zionist or pro-BDS or something, and, to be like, for like a pro-single state with the right to return. And in that vacuum, there has been a new movement of American citizens who are looking to sort of fill that void, and that void is being filled currently by right-wing Christian evangelicals. A lot of this, it's sort of wrapped up in an Armageddon apocalyptic vision of what Israel policy needs to be, which is, in their understanding, their sort of spiritual understanding of foreign policy, is that all the Jews need to be sent to Israel, and if all the Jews are in Israel, then Armageddon will happen. It's pretty dark stuff. But this conviction and this belief has made a connection between right-wing evangelicals and right-wing Israel. And, as Israel's government is sort of self-selecting with a lot of the more leftist and communist inclined people, like those sort of in like northern Israel in the kibbutzes, that experiment has effectively failed. And a lot of those people have either given up on their leftist politics or have given up on Israel and have moved to Europe, which is hilarious in the context of the 20th century. But that's what happened, and that's the facts on the ground. Ronnie Kasrils, a freedom fighter in the African National Congress, who fought with Nelson Mandela to fight apartheid. He's a South African Jew who saw the face of apartheid and battled it head on. He describes the current Israeli state as apartheid. I'm going to trust him. I trust someone with those kinds of convictions way more than I trust some random piece of literature funded by Sheldon Adelson. So, in that context, Baron Cohen inviting someone like Roy Moore, a Christian, right-wing Christian evangelical, to go do this, silly, very silly event, and to mock him and his stupid cowboy hat and his weird pedo shit. To put that into context, what Cohen's trying to do is he's trying to highlight the lack of an actual cultural connection to the state of Israel that someone like Moore has. And also to show the very odd and very bizarre allies that the current state of Israel has in America, as to maybe be a way to say to other, more liberal Western Jews who might still support the state of Israel, like, whoa, wait a minute, guys. This is who your allies are. That matters. That's a good joke. It might not be the funniest joke. I don't know. I haven't seen it. The show is not out. But it really felt to me that this piece in Vox by Asia Romano was basically just trying to make the case that they just didn't like Baron Cohen's brand of comedy. Basically. Because a lot of these points just didn't really, in the historical political context, it's just sort of cautious civility politics, which is just silly. Especially in the context of what we're actually fighting. And that's fine if Romano doesn't like Baron Cohen's comedy. But don't engage in basically giving the right wing and giving them way more of the benefit of the doubt than you have any evidence to actually do, just so you can make the point that maybe you personally think his brand of comedy is outdated. That is really missing the forest for the trees. And it really, it takes the part of it that really bothers me is it takes the agency away from the right wing. It's putting all of the agency on basically an elite group of media class liberals. And it's taking out the context of what these people actually believe. And we don't need to do that. That's not just factually wrong. It's bad politics. Comedy and satire in this media context are incredibly important because it's a way to get people engaged. The melding of news and entertainment and comedy is all, it's a thing people have been talking about for ages. You talk about it with Jon Stewart's Daily Show, which in retrospect is super milquetoast and not that important in the grand scheme of things, But that is so real on social media right now. You have to have a reason for someone to want to click on something. So to act like this kind of comedy is just sort of empty calories, while acting like conservatives aren't already in an alternate universe, is just bizarre. And Asia Romano do better. The other piece that I wrote this week was also a response to another sort of cautious liberal take on media and on sort of this time though it was criticizing the left from the center. I guess that's actually basically what the same thing was. Never mind. Whatever, it's fine. I'm not going to edit that out. In The Stranger, my local alt weekly of Dan Savage fame, there's a writer named Katie Herzog who I know a lot of people who I am friends with on social media do not like. She's sort of enemy number one at the local paper. And I've definitely seen some of her articles and been like, that seems kind of weird. But admittedly, it was just I just wasn't that engaged in the arguments that she was writing about. Like, she wrote an article a little while ago about like call out culture or the culture war stuff, and it seemed a little off. I'm always cautious of people who do the who get like frustrated at identity politics and call out culture, not because I think that those things aren't like things to criticize, but if you do that, but you don't also have like a more explicitly like, I don't know, I guess like socialist understanding or sort of like a socialist interpretation of why there are problems with those things, it's very suspect to me. If you will start to criticize identity politics or call out culture, but all you focus on is just how the left is doing it, or just how they're attacking you, as opposed to it being like, oh, think about how these ideas are used to reinforce the wills of capital or the wills of a certain political establishment, kind of like how is explained in Assad Haider's new book, Mistaken Identity, or like how Brianna Joy Gray has written about in Current Affairs and The Intercept. Like, there are very clear ways to criticize identity politics and to criticize the left. And I've seen Herzog attempt to do that, but she never does the left critique. Yet she still acts like she's a member of the left, which is a bit of a reason why her most recent article about Jordan Peterson, called, I believe the article is called "The Left's Mischaracterization of Jordan Peterson Will Make His Followers Turn Right." Obviously, I disagree. I've written other stuff about Jordan Peterson. I've recorded other stuff about Jordan Peterson on this podcast feed. Not a fan. I think he's basically just a traditionalist reactionary. But he uses the language of self-help, Jungian psychology, and sort of vague sort of history, high school history class versions of the Enlightenment to defend his perspective, or to like protect his person. Yeah, I don't. It's very muddled. And in the article, Herzog claims that the left has been mischaracterizing Jordan Peterson by calling him racist or misogynistic or homophobic or any of those phrases. And again, this is a writer who has written sort of a center reaction, many a centrist reaction to identity politics. So I kind of have a feeling where she's coming from this, because she doesn't talk about the systems that perpetuate this. She just talks about how, taking quotes of Peterson, how reading them incredibly literally, saying, how could someone say that he's racist? He didn't say the N-word. How could they say this? Da, 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 da. It's not quite that bad. So why are activists in Durham, which is sort of the setting for a lot of this article, why would an activist in Durham be rejecting his speaks? He's doing like a speech there. Why would they want to make a point to push against that? He's just out there trying to help people be better people. There were people of color in the audience there. How could he be racist? And the cherry picking in Herzog's writing is incredibly disingenuous to me. And part of it is that the essence of whenever Jordan Peterson talks about politics and talks about culture, whenever he's talking about something that isn't as simple as like, clean your room, bucko, it always comes back to his adoration and his insistence on the importance of social hierarchy, social and political hierarchies as outgrowths of natural law. That, in essence, those of us who look to, from a leftist socialist perspective, whose main drive in politics is the destruction of hierarchy and the bringing out sort of a more egalitarian worldview. He describes it as us longing for it's such a stupid phrase, but an equality of outcome, which is such a vague concept, because obviously I want to have an equality of outcome in that I don't want anyone to be poor, and I want everyone to be able to have a house and to have food. But then he equates that idea with we all want everyone to have the same career as LeBron James or something. It's preposterous. It's sophistry. But his adoration and his defense of the naturalization of hierarchy in the context of the world that we live in can easily be construed as racist or sexist or homophobic or classist or anti-Semitic or whatever. It can. Because if you're defending the status quo as it is now, you are inherently defending the different systems that create it. So by Herzog trying to do this little double game where she's taking this quote and then saying, how is that racist? And then acting like that his defense of hierarchy doesn't mean following the logical steps of it, can't be construed as racist. It's just silly. And, I think there is another great Jungian, one of significantly greater achievement academically, professionally, maybe not on Patreon. I think he died before Patreon was a real big thing. Who knows? Maybe James Hillman could have been great. But James Hillman is a great Jungian psychoanalyst who worked at the Jung Center in Zurich for decades, and and had many different contexts of his work. But there's a fantastic interview with him done in the late 90s. Definitely not a great time to come out as a Marxist, but in the late 90s, this was sort of after working in this field for 50 years. Hillman essentially comes out as a Marxist and talks about how the effects of capitalism on the individual and on the soul of the individual means that in many ways the goals of psychoanalysis, and especially sort of depth psychology, which is the school that he's most associated with, is impossible to complete because of the social and economic conditions of society. That the inequality and the trauma that's being placed onto people of all different classes mean that sort of self, finding the greatness of the self and sort of that self realization and the sort of goals of psychoanalysis as sort of a kind of intellectual, spiritual realization are impossible without social and political organizing that restructures society to deal with these things, And I'm currently reading David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs. And he talks about sort of how even those of us who have jobs, I don't actually have a job like this. I don't know why I said those of us, but, who have a job where basically you don't have to do anything. Your job is bullshit. You're not really adding anything. You're just sort of there. He goes further into it. I would recommend reading it. But even those jobs have a psychic and emotional damage that it does to the individual. So, not to mention the jobs where you're just abjectly exploited or are living in poverty, which have very obvious causes to damage to the psyche. And this worldview, it seems to me like inconvertibly true. Like, there is no amount of self-reflection and therapy and processing one can go through if you're still worried about hunger, or if your entire job all day is basically pushing misery onto people. You know? That some of these problems are inherently social problems. They're beyond the individual. And so much of Jordan Peterson's world perspective is about this protection of the individual. And the individual is sacrosanct. And that everything has to be done to protect the individual. And that's essentially just libertarianism, American libertarianism. And that is a society and worldview that is essentially trying to recreate feudalism. I don't know if that's what they realize that's what they're doing, but this intense level of economic and social inequality, that is what that will lead to, no doubt. So what figures like Peterson are basically trying to do is they're trying to defend the status quo and defend those who have power and create sort of thought technologies to have those who are subjects of the powerful be able to justify their own existence without actually wanting to revolt against the systems of power that they're dealing with. This is not to mention, though, as Herzog talks about in her piece, people are mischaracterizing Jordan Peterson. It's fucking easy to mischaracterize Jordan Peterson because he is so goddamn vague, and every other time you call him on his shit, as is shown even in like friendly spaces like Joe Rogan's podcast, Peterson will say, "You're mischaracterizing my speech, bucko." And this vacillating take that he does constantly, where he's basically talking out of both sides of his mouth, ends up to where if you're not approaching it critically, you can kind of just get whatever you want from him while he's still subliminally putting in these messages that it's more important for you to have to be absolutely perfect in your own world. And, he talks about, like, make sure your home is in exact perfect order before you criticize someone else. As though we're not all in a society where all of our homes are connected and are all being impacted by each other. So how could my home be in absolutely perfect order without criticizing someone else? Without interacting and without having a framework for understanding why my home is the way it is. Herzog in her piece says that Peterson is not a right-winger, and that by claiming he's a right-winger, claiming he's a part of the alt-right, or the alt-light, as they call it, those of us on the left, which again she says she's a member of, I don't know, I'm questioning that for sure, that us questioning Peterson and sort of lumping him in with like these like quote unquote free speech warriors like Milo Yiannopoulos or Richard Spencer or I don't know, Dave Rubin even. By lumping him in with them, we're just pushing people to the right. And I just don't buy it. I don't think that we have to accept these faulty premises. I don't think we have to accept these points to try to convince people to become, socialist. I don't think we need to do that. I think we can look at sort of what is Jordan Peterson, what hole is Jordan Peterson filling in these people's lives? I think what he's doing is he's giving a lot of these people meaning, and he's sort of giving them a structure. And he's giving them a narrative to explain why they're sad, basically. And I think the left also has a narrative for that. It's just not individualistic in the same way. It's not traditionalistic in the same way. It believes in solidarity and collective action. And it knows that the disparity in resource distribution is inherently going to affect people's lives, and that those who take all the resources, those who extract our labor, they're the dragons to be slain. Not literally, but their wealth is to be taken. They're hoarding it. They're the dragons hoarding that stuff. To use the metaphor that Peterson loves to use with like dragons and dragon slayers and the hero's journey. Like, the problem with the Peterson worldview is that it thinks we're all singular heroes in the world, but the point of the left and the point of like all of these different struggles is that we're not looking to be the hero. The point is that you take where you are and you get together, and together you slay the dragon and you spread those resources. You don't just do it for yourself. And I'm not really sure what Herzog was trying to prove with this article. I sent in my essay that I wrote to The Stranger. They're probably not going to publish it. It's fine. But when I see people like this doing this and saying that they're doing it from the left, all I can think of is a figure like Dave Rubin, who was like part of the Young Turks and then just wanted to make a bunch of money. And then he just like created this facade of like, I'm leaving the left, the illiberal left. I can't handle it anymore. They're just too extreme. When like a big part of it was that he just got a bunch of money from the Koch brothers. Or he found this new market of this kind of, atheist shut-in, or whatever. And I can't help but, especially after when Herzog published this piece, the reason why it got on my radar in the first place was I saw that Christina Hoff Sommers, another sort of faux, she loves to talk about how she's still a Democrat and she's a feminist, but she's against everything that Democrats and feminists do. And not from like a left socialist feminist perspective, believe me, not that kind of criticism. And also someone like Barry Weiss, I think, retweeted the story. And, Herzog was like saying on Twitter, like, oh, it's so lonely out here. Defending Jordan Peterson from the left. And then just like all these people showed up on Twitter like to support her. It's like, I don't think it's that lonely. I think you're just trying to find a different lane. And that's fine. But I'm then going to question your chance to describe yourself as being on the left. Maybe you're a liberal. Maybe you're like a moderate liberal. Maybe you're a classical liberal. But if you can see the thought processes and the language and the kind of politics that someone like Jordan Peterson espouses, and then you can't see how other people can have this perspective, and that you accept these right-wing frameworks, I don't know if you should call yourself a member of the left. That's okay. You're a member of the center. Maybe the right. But definitely the center. That's okay. But doing that, what you're just trying to punch left. And I've followed enough blogging and like liberal left politics to know when someone is just out there to hippie punch. And that's what Herzog's doing. And that's fine. Just be honest. You're a hippie punching liberal. There's a great tradition of that. Yes, a lot of them were wrong, but there's a great tradition of that, And if this is the kind of civility politics and respectability politics you want to engage in, Katie, go ahead, Katie. I'm fine with it. Just, just admit what you are. Just to finish off this episode, it's a bit of a long one. I haven't gotten to do one of these solo episodes for a while. It feels good. And I'm going to definitely try to be doing these once a week, at least once every 2 weeks, especially if I write something and I can then talk about it. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. It's the Unpopular Front podcast. Go to unpopularfront.com. Share articles. You know, we're on Medium. Everything's pretty much on Medium and the website. Whichever one you prefer. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Udashen. That's BenUdashen. We're on Patreon at Unpopular Front. Patreon.com/unpopularfront, I believe. Enjoy the rest of your week. This has been Udashen saying solidarity forever, my bros and brosifses and non-binary friends. We got this.